welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. I want to thank you for being with me today. And today with me, the special guest of the day is Mark Black. Mark, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Marcus. This is awesome.
Yeah. So we've known each other, what now, like, I don't know, maybe 5 years?
Something like that.
Seem like something like that? Maybe even longer.
Virtually for that long. And then we finally got to meet earlier this year, which was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So we met through National Speakers Association, and I knew I wanted to have you on the program because of your patient story, but I guess I should give people a little bit of your background too, that you're a speaker, you're an author, you're a coach, and you have a claim to fame in addition to gold Olympic medals, right? That you are the first person to ever run a marathon with another human being's lungs and heart.
That is correct. Yeah.
Wow. So I want to hear all of this, like from the beginning. So
Okay.
I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder or frame this improperly, but I want to hear it all. So
all right.
Let's start us out.
Okay. Well, so this is not the typical 10-minute media interview where I have to give the 10-second version of a very long story, and I'll try not to be too long, but
also in this too, it's all about compassion and courage, and this is going to be a story of both of those.
Absolutely.
Because you, being a survivor of major medical intervention, as I have been, that's a story, and then to do the next steps beyond just survival, but moving into thrive, that's fantastic. So I'm so looking forward to hearing your story. So yeah, where do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to start at the very beginning. I promise we will. It won't be sometimes that's scary because I'm going to start when I was born. But the health journey really does start there. So I was born Moncton, New Brunswick, a little corner on the southeastern part of Canada, a town of about 100,000 people, to two 24-year-old first-time parents. And I mention that because as a parent myself now, I have greater appreciation for what that must have been like, because I was the firstborn of that family, of my family. And it was 1978. Technology was not what it is today. And so they had no inclination of what was about to happen. But when I was born, I turned blue. Doctors ran some tests and determined that I had aortic valve that didn't work. So one of the major valves in the heart just simply didn't open and close. It was just closed. And I was medevaced by helicopter to the Children's Hospital, which was 3 hours away, and had open heart surgery at 24 hours old, sort of. And was very fortunate that I was in the hands of a gifted surgeon who saved my life the first time, and then was cared for by an incredible team of medical professionals, some amazing ICU nurses that Mom still talks about to this day, who were able to get me through that first traumatic time, not for me, but for my parents, because I don't remember it, thankfully. And then there was another surgery when I was a year old, and then doctor said, look, this kid's never going to have a normal life, right? He's going to have medical challenges his whole life. He'll be on medications forever. He'll probably need more surgery before he starts school. And I to the credit of my parents and the medical professionals that cared for me and the grace of God and whatever else, I didn't. I did quite well medically for 23 years, really, with some hiccups along the way, but nothing significant, no other surgeries. And then at 23, I was attending university. I was doing my second degree. I had gotten a bachelor's of English degree and was now doing my Bachelor of Education degree to become a teacher like my parents. That was my plan and my dream. And over the course of the second semester of that first year, I just slowly deteriorated. climbing the hill to go to class became more and more difficult. I was tired more often, but I was also a 24-year-old guy, and so I sort of just ignored symptoms far longer than I should have and brushed them off and pretended that I was okay. And so what might have been avoided or at least prolonged was not, because I didn't address it soon enough. And I came home at the end of the semester, and my mom had not seen me in a couple of months and took one look at me and went, "You're going to the doctor right now." And ultimately, what had happened is I had lost about a third of my body weight in 3 months, and
Oh my
I'm a
goodness.
120 pound guy. So when you lose a third of your
Yeah.
body weight at that weight, it's pretty significant and pretty scary. And I was informed that I was in end stage heart failure and needed a heart and two new lungs like yesterday.
So okay, so let me recap and see if I got it this all. You are it as an infant, 24 hours old, you go into major heart surgery,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you say that you didn't have any kind of significant medical issues for the next 23 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what we say, what we consider significant.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, so one of the gifts of congenital chronic illness, if there is such a thing, is that perspective is there from the jump. And so so regular, like quarterly visits to cardiologist was just how I grew up. It was just a normal thing that you did. Um, Pediatrician visits and family doctor visits on a regular basis was just something that I did. Um, Challenges, I mean, so I developed atrial fibrillation, which is a complication of the heart that required more medication. And then at some point, I was no longer able to be uh, competitive in sports as I had been when I was younger, because I had some rhythm abnormalities that um, meant it was more dangerous to do that. And so there were lots of I mean, little in by comparison things.
but not consistent childhood like pediatric hospitalization.
No, I'd be hospitalized sort of. Actually, I really wasn't hospitalized much at all until I was about 13, 14. And then the
Wow.
lung function um, started to have some hiccups. So I'd get hospitalized sort of a couple of times a year with pneumonia and things like that. Nothing sort of life threatening, but enough to keep me in the hospital for a few days here and there. But no, not like comparatively speaking, a pretty smooth journey for 20 plus years.
Wow, that's amazing, especially considering 1978 technology.
Right.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so bring us back to your mom sees you, takes one look at you, and you're skinny and as probably saying you're kind of wasting away here.
Yeah.
Get you to the doctor. They tell you you need heart and lungs ASAP.
Yeah. So
Wow.
the family doctor who had been caring for me for basically my entire life, Tom Laughlin, amazing physician. Uh, he, he was always cautious. He was great at balancing the balance between being cautious and allowing me to kind of try and live a normal life at the same time. But so when he saw that, he just said, "Oh, go to the hospital in town, but we're probably going to send you to Halifax, which was the closest cardiology specialty hospital." And that's what ended up happening. So I was hospitalized in town for about a week while they kind of stabilized me, got some fluid off of my lungs. I was at this point in right and left sided heart failure, which the symptoms of which are you become short of breath from the fluid on your lungs, and you become bloated in the abdomen because of the fluid backing up from the right sided heart failure, and that squeezes your stomach. And so that was the reason for the weight loss, is I just straight up wasn't eating as much um, over a period of months, and had not been paying attention, not didn't notice. And so I was taken by ambulance from Moncton, where I lived, to Halifax to the cardiology team there. And I was hospitalized for a month. And over that month, they ran all of the tests and things and determined that what we knew was going to come someday, which was transplant, was now, and that we needed to get me listed ASAP.
And how long did that take for you to receive that gift?
Yeah, it was not a straightforward process. So in fact, when the doctor says you need this transplant like yesterday, um, he also simultaneously said, "But you are such a high risk candidate. I don't know if we can get you on a transplant list at all." The way the transplant system works is obviously uh, someone who needs a transplant is matched with a donor, and sadly, there just aren't enough donors for everybody that needs a transplant, and so the doctors are and medical teams are forced to kind of do this resource allocation exercise where they figure out, okay, where can we best place organs, not only that are going to suit the person in terms of blood type and size, but that have the best chance. The person has the best chance of long-term survival, because these organs could also go to 5 other people, and we don't want to give them to the person who they're not likely to be well used in. And so I had a number of factors working against me. One being congenital illness, because folks who are born with an illness tend not to survive as well. I was small, so I'm 4'11", and at that point weighed 85 pounds. And the typical donor is, a 25-year-old guy that rides a motorcycle without a helmet, and his lungs are not going to fit in this body. And I needed 3 organs, right? So it's not a kidney or a heart; it's 3 organs. And so the doctor said, "Look," and I was critically ill. That was the other thing. So you want to be. It's kind of I call it the Goldilocks syndrome, because to get a transplant, you need to be sick enough that you can't last for a long period of time without it. Otherwise, we want to wait. And you can't be so sick that you're not going to be able to survive the trauma of the surgery and the intense recovery period that happens afterwards. And so you have to be kind of just right. And my doctor felt like you might be too sick at this point to even get the transplant. So all of that being said, I said, well, the alternative is to go home and die. So how about we try and get me on a list? And I was lucky enough that the team in Toronto, the multi organ transplant team in Toronto, was willing to kind of roll the dice on me and put me on the list. And in later years after the surgery, I met the head of that team, and he said, "I remember your case." He said, "I remember when we talked about your case, and you were a coin flip about whether we should put you on the list or not." So I don't know if I called head or tails, but whatever I called, I guess I got it right.
Yeah, yeah. So you're a special case, right? I've got two different uncles who have, are since passed that received transplants, not of heart and lungs, but I guess one of the common misunderstandings is that there's the list and there's a person at the
Right.
top of the
Right.
list, but it's not exactly that way, right? I mean, it's a lot more uh, of a matching process, and it's not just you get the first one that comes along. So tell me about that, like medically. What, did they have to find a adolescent, or how did
Likely,
that happen?
likely. So you're right. So yeah, people refer to the list, quote unquote, all the time, and in reality, it's almost like a series of lists is probably the best way to imagine it, because you're dealing with a multitude of variables, from body weight, body like size, uh, organ type, blood type match, right? Which kind of organ you
Mhm.
need, geographic location. So initially, I was put on a Canadian list. As I became more critically ill, I was prioritized to the North American list. So they're taking from a larger pool of donors potentially. Um, and so you're kind of like, are you at the top of the list? You can be at the top of quote of your list, quote unquote, which is like. And so at a certain point, I was going to be the next person to get a heart and lungs that fit my criteria of size and blood type. Um, and so I was put on the list in October of 2001, and I got the transplant in September of 2002. So just under a year on the list. And the last 6 months of that, I was hospitalized. So that's when I was prioritized to the North American list. And like my situation, my medical condition just grew to the point where it was too perilous to have me waiting outside the hospital. And so I was put on 24-hour telemetry heart monitoring system in hospital, and that's where I spent the last 6 months waiting.
How much of it do you remember?
I remember all of that until
All of it.
until yeah, rolling into the operating room. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Those 6 months were both the hardest and, yeah, most probably fruitful personal growth wise period of time in my entire life.
Yeah, yeah. And you're 23 at this time,
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I'm just, of course, thinking of myself at 23 and being a young man going through some major changes like this. But, I never had to like have somebody coming down the path at me saying, you may not be here tomorrow, right? You may not be here in a week.
Yeah.
That's some, that's big, man. That's huge.
It is. It's intense, and it took most of that 10 months to process, quite honestly. I think
Hmm.
probably by the last month or two, I think is when I finally settled into the acceptance that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. Like I really got to a place where I was okay with dying, which sounds like a weird thing to say. But I just had finally relinquished the fact that I did not control that situation. Um, Obviously, I still wanted to live, but I was also
Hmm.
okay with with not living. And that that adjustment and that journey to acceptance of that is something that I try to live to this day, and has served me well in many ways.
So like, gosh, I want to go into your, I want to keep hearing your patient story, but I also imagine that much of this is chronicled in your new book that's coming out, right?
Thank you for that. Yes, it is. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the resilience roadmap is coming out in June, and we'll share a link with everybody later. I get a special
Hmm.
promo just for the just for your audience. But
Awesome.
yeah, yeah, I share the journey of the transplant, and more importantly for me, uh, the journey of the lessons learned along the way, and a lot of those lessons came from the people who cared for me, from my parents to my friends to the incredible medical professionals who I was fortunate enough to be cared by. And the wisdom that was acquired over the course of that time um, helped me get through that time, but also continues to serve me and hopefully the audiences that I now get to speak to. This is really what my journey as a speaker has been all about, is trying to take these powerful life lessons that I think you only learn either through uh, decades of life or through traumatic experiences like you and I have lived.
Mhm.
I think one of
Yeah.
the things about trauma and intense experiences like that is it sort of compacts life experience into a much shorter period of time. And you're forced to hopefully mature and learn faster than maybe somebody who doesn't have those challenges to face.
So one of the questions that I ask every guest, going back to the title of the show, compassion and courage,
Mm,
is this. This is also the first assignment that I give to my pre-meds at Notre Dame every semester, and that is that I ask you to share a time that someone was there for you or that you were there for someone else. Is there a specific story, whether it's from your hospitalization or after the with the transplant in that period of life, or throughout your life when you said you had a lot of childhood hospitalizations? Is there a particular story that comes to mind when I say somebody was there for you or you were there for someone else?
I mean, there are honestly dozens,
Yeah, yeah.
but I'll pick one for the sake of the show, and that is my mom and my dad.
Mhm.
So we're told I need this transplant, and that involved, by the way, moving 1,000 miles away because the transplant center was in Toronto. I'm from the east coast of Canada. It's about 1,000 miles away, and to be listed, you had to live within about 100-mile radius of the hospital at all times while you were on the list. So there was no being listed unless I moved. And so from that moment, mom and dad, and I have three younger brothers, incidentally, mom and dad had to make a series of very difficult life decisions about how we were going to do that. And never was there a question that one of them would not be with me. So they made the decision very immediately that one of them would be with me at all times. And so that meant just a ridiculous amount of sacrifice on their part in terms of a being apart from each other, because they're still madly in love after 45 years of marriage, which is
Hmm.
wonderful. But they also
Yeah.
wanted to be there for my younger brothers, and also stay employed and pay bills and all of those things. And they decided not to move the whole family. That was one thing we thought about. They decided to try and stabilize life for my brothers. So one of them stayed home with my brothers, and one was with me. And they, fortunately for us, they're both phys ed teachers, so they have very similar um, expertise and backgrounds. They had similar roles in the same school board, and the school board was gracious enough to allow them to essentially share one job. So they would switch back and forth every 3 or 4 months, kind of thing, through this journey. Um, but yeah, I did not go a single day in 10 months on the list or 6 months in that room alone. And that was because of the tremendous sacrifice that they made. Um, and I remember, initially kind of brushing that off. Again, I had this 24-year-old, 23-year-old guy ego that said, I can handle this. I've been through lots of tough things before. And I couldn't have been more wrong. If I had tried to do this alone, I would not have emotionally survived. Um, and I emotionally and mentally was only able to survive because of the sacrifice that they made to just be there. And not only to be there, but to be there and keep me, you know, uplifted and encouraged and pick me up when the doctor came in and gave another bad diagnosis of something else that was going wrong, or we really hoped this was going to be the week that the donor was found and it wasn't. I mean, there were just so many times along the way where I was tempted to lose hope, and I can only imagine that they were also feeling those same things, right? But they had to kind of process that outside of that room so that they could be present for me. It still kind of boggles my mind, honestly.
It's a sacred thing, right? It's a sacred thing when you can truly be there for someone else. And
Yeah.
you know, the it wasn't until I got into college and um, that I kind of figured out. You start meeting a lot more people that you figure out, wow, not everybody has
Hmm.
great parents,
No,
right?
that's
Not
right.
everybody has a stable and the older I get, the more grateful I become to my parents for, being the kind of stability that I so desperately needed during that time. And not
Hmm.
everybody has that gift. Not everybody gets really good parents, right?
No, you're absolutely right, and like everything in life, I think you know we take for granted that which is normal for us. And so,
Right, right.
right, I like you, I was just blessed with really great human beings who happen to be my parents. And they're your parents, so like, it's mom and dad, and they drive me crazy and they're on my case, and all the rest of it. And it wasn't really until that experience that I began to appreciate. And then ever since then, I bump into people in our hometown. I'm back where I grew up.
Mhm,
They were both teachers. I bump into people all the time who tell me stories about, oh yeah, I remember your
mhm.
mom, I remember your dad, and they were this great teacher, and they were there for me here, and they were there for me there, and wow, they give so much to the community, and they volunteer here, and they do all this great stuff, and um, yeah, and to me that was it was just mom and dad.
It's such a beautiful thing. I want to ask you too, because I want to go back to your recovery. So
Mm.
you're laying in such dire straits here, right? Super critical condition,
Hmm.
but you get the heart and lung transplant. How long of a period from then until you decide to run a marathon?
So the period from when I had the surgery until I decided that I would try and run a marathon was actually ridiculously short. It was about 7 days. So what happened was, post surgery, I'm in intensive care, obviously, for 5 or 6 days. most of which I don't remember except for some hallucinations from the morphine, which were entertaining. Uh, but it was about day 6 or 7. I just had this moment finally with, where I was more conscious and aware of what had happened. And I wouldn't say I'd processed it yet because that took a lot longer. But I was at least aware that okay, I'm alive and I've had this surgery. And I can feel the strong rhythmic steady heartbeat. It's the most one of the strangest moments of my life was this echoing sound in my ear of a heartbeat and realizing it wasn't mine. And my heart, the one I was born with, uh, beat irregularly irregular. In other words, it kind of beat whenever the heck it felt like it, but that was my normal. So if you had that heartbeat today, you would be alarmed very quickly and you would say something is going on. I need to go to get this checked out. But for me, that was normal. And so the regular heartbeat was abnormal and it felt very strange. And so on one side it was, oh my gosh, I'm living because this other person is no longer living, which is a whole other thing that I had to process. But it also meant possibility. That rhythmic steady heartbeat meant perhaps I can have a quality of life and a level of health that I have never had before. And I don't know where the idea came from, but I decided I wonder if that means I could be physically active again. I wonder if that means I could run a marathon. So I was literally sitting in the ICU when the idea kind of dawned on me.
And then how long from then till you
Yeah,
did it?
2.5 years.
Two and a half
2.5
years.
years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it took, and it was pretty steady work the whole time. Like, so the first, month and a half is just rehabbing to be able to kind of walk, well, not walk again, but be able to have the kind of strength, right? I mean, the surgery takes a lot out of you. And I had basically been sedentary for the last 6 months because I was in hospital. So I hadn't been doing much other than walking laps around the hospital ward. So regaining sort of basic strength was the first project. And then it was after 3 or 4 months of rehab in the hospital, there's an intense rehab process that they kind of force you to go through, and I'm grateful for it. Uh, then it was, okay, well, I'm going to continue doing this on my own. And it was, okay, can I jog a 5K? And that took, I don't know, 6 months or something. And then can I do a 10? And then can I do a half marathon? And so all told, it was about 2.5 years.
And then he did it again and again and again.
Yes.
And there's gold medals along the way while we're at it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think anybody who is kind of motivated by setting goals can relate to this. You set the goal, you achieve it, and then you kind of go, okay, great, that was awesome. Now what? Like, now I need a new one.
Mhm.
Um, and so every marathon was kind of like, well, that was awesome. Let's go do another one. And then, um, so I did 4 of those, basically one a year for 4 years. And then we had our second child, my wife and I. And I remember going out for a long Sunday run. On Sunday mornings, we would do our endurance runs. And I was going out for a long Sunday run, and I looked back at my wife carrying an infant with a 3-year-old running around, and I knew I was going to be gone for 4 hours for that run. And then once you've run for 4 hours, you're pretty kind of used. Like, I would sit on the couch and recover the rest of the day. And I thought, this doesn't quite seem fair. That I'm doing this for,
Mhm.
the fulfillment of me achieving this goal while she's doing all this work. So I stopped doing distance running at that point, and really haven't returned. I might do it again someday, but we have 3 kids now, so I kind of have to get them through at least the next little bit of. Our youngest is 6, so maybe when he's in his teen years, I'll be able to do it again. Um, and then the medals, yeah. I mean, to clarify, I won gold medals at something called the Canadian Transplant Games, which is essentially like the Olympics for people who have had transplants. I joke it's the only competitive sport where you are disqualified for testing negative for steroids, because
Interesting. Yeah.
steroids are part of the anti-rejection drug regimen for
Mhm.
transplant recipients. And so everybody there is on steroids. Everybody there has a scar. And it's really more about I mean, obviously it's about, yeah, competition and testing your athletic ability, but it's more about the camaraderie and social element of meeting other people who have been through a similar traumatic experience, and encouraging each other to keep moving forward and to push our limits and all of those good things.
And that's what you do professionally, speaking professionally, writing, coaching. Give me a little bit more about that. Who do you tell me what you do in your audiences that you do it for?
Sure. So, I mean, I think I would, to the layperson, I'd be called a motivational speaker. I'm not a super
Mm-hmm.
big fan of that term, only because I think it misattributes who actually does the motivating, right? People have to motivate themselves. I try and give the people a spark that gets them started, and they have to fan that flame and keep going. But yeah, I have the privilege to travel all around North America and speak to mostly professional associations, a large portion of which are in healthcare. So we do a lot. I do a lot of healthcare conferences. That's where you and I met. Was at one of
Mm-hmm.
those. Lots for nurses and other physicians and other professionals in the medical field, and then a smattering of other things. I spoke for a group of engineers who work in the oil field a couple of weeks ago, and I admittedly said to them, I have no concept really of what you do, but I do have this framework for resilience that I think is applicable to everybody in every field, because we all face challenges. And so that's sort of the universality of the message that that I'm able to leverage when I'm speaking to a group that isn't healthcare focused. When I'm working with a
Mm-hmm.
group of healthcare professionals, we focus more obviously on the medical part of my story, because they get it, and because hopefully it's affirmation for them that their work matters, because I'm here today precisely because those people did not only did their job but did it so well.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And because somebody made the choice to be an organ donor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about that for a
Mm-hmm.
second. Yeah, if you're listening to this and you haven't made that decision, please talk to your family. I am alive because somebody did. And to your question earlier, we don't know anything about my donor because the process is anonymous, and it's that way on purpose. But we know, with a fair degree of certainty based on just the physical realities, that I probably received the organs of a child, of a someone sort of
Mm-hmm.
10 to 14 years old. And as a parent, I can not even wrap my head around what it must have been like for those parents in that moment. Because to 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 agree to organ donation means you are making the most selfless of decisions in the most difficult moment of your life, right? In probably the worst moment you are ever going to have, which is losing a person that you are incredibly close to, because to be next of kin means you're the person closest to that person in the world. Um, and you have to think about somebody else instead of thinking about yourself in the moment of grief. And um, that's something that is just awe-inspiring to me. I hope that I
Yeah.
would be able to do that, but I don't know that I could.
Well, we're thankful for your life and your work and the donors
Yeah,
gift too. Absolutely. Hey, so in the time that we have left here, I'd like to shoot some random questions by you.
love it.
Is that okay?
Yeah, let's
All
go.
right. So let's go back to like when you were in high school. You're hanging out with your friends. It's whatever, Friday night, hanging out with your friends, cruising around town, etc. What are you listening to? What's on the stereo? What was
Oh,
your music type when you were in high school?
so strangely enough, my high school was full of like these. We all wanted to be hippies again. I don't know if it's because our parents
Mm-hmm.
were that way or something. So we were all into like the Doors and Grateful
Mm-hmm.
Dead and um, yeah, all of those kinds of tunes. And we were trying to dress like we were in 1965 again. It was really bizarre. Uh, when I think about it now, it's all kind of weird. But yeah, so that's what we'd be listening to.
Yeah, I was doing the same thing just without the clothes.
There you go.
You know, I still say to this day I'm just a dirt hippie. You know,
Yeah.
I love '60s. 60s, 70s rock. And I love the Dead. I love the whole psychedelic era kind of thing. So,
Well, and even to this day, so my favorite band now would be Dave Matthews, which is really not all that
mhm.
dissimilar from many similarities to the Grateful
Right.
Dead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so my next question then for you is, let's say that you you have to go to the proverbial desert island, right? But it's still a well furnished desert island. You've got your food and drink and all that kind of covered, but you only get to take one piece of art with you.
Hmm.
And what piece of art would that be? Whether it's a film, a book, I don't even know, Broadway musical, a series of books, a
Okay.
Netflix series.
Wow. Wow.
Or
Wow. Wow.
another way to ask that too is, what is a piece of art that speaks to your heart?
I think the first thing that jumps to mind is a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which was a transformative book for me. I've read it a couple of times. Viktor Frankl, if you're not familiar, psychologist who survived the Holocaust, was imprisoned in concentration camps and writes about what he learned in that experience. And it was a book that I read. I believe the first time I read it was while I was going through the transplant or shortly afterwards. And there's just so much wisdom packed in that book that it's one of those things I think you can read 5 times and get something new out of every time. So that's probably
Mhm.
what I pick.
It's a great choice too. I was introduced to that about probably less than 2 years after my trauma, and it transformative would be a good word.
Mm-hmm.
Transformative would be a good word. So if y'all haven't listened to that book, or you haven't read that book, put it on your list. Put it on your list. And so my last question for you today is, let's say that you have the world's largest billboard on the world's tallest mountain. What is the message that you want to broadcast to humanity?
Do not live every day like it's your last day, which is that uh, trite saying that we've all been told. But do be alive every day. I think what this journey has taught me is the how precious time is and how quickly it goes and how easy it is to waste it and what a gift it is to just be alive and then to be alive and have won what I consider the genetic lottery of being born when I was and where I was is just such a gift, and I feel an obligation to use it. And so I share with audiences all the time: live today. Stop. I think it's so easy for us to waste time regretting the mistakes we've made because we've all made them, or worrying about what might happen that we can't control. And the only thing you really have any power over is where you are right here, right now, and how you're using that. And so that's what the message I would try and share.
Be alive today, right?
Yeah.
Be alive today. Yeah, I'm going to have to contemplate on that. That's great. That's great. Mark, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you for sharing your story, and not just with me and the audience, but also for organizations around the continent. Thank you for being a survivor and using your life as a gift.
Thank you, Marcus, for the opportunity to chat with y'all today. And for anybody listening, if you're interested in grabbing a copy of the book, you can go to markblack.ca/Marcus. markblack.ca/Marcus, and that's going to give you a discount code. You can pre-order the book if it hasn't come out yet, because I don't know exactly when this episode is going to drop, but it may be available to buy right away, and if not, it's available for pre-order at that link. So thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to the next time our paths will cross.
Yeah, Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Mark. And listeners, thank you for being here for this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. I want to thank everyone again and again and again for sharing, subscribing, liking, doing all that interaction on the socials. We appreciate you, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Compassion and Courage.